The competitive 40K network presents Art of War. Art of War. Strategy and tactics. Discussions with the best players on the planet. Now your host, Nick Nanavati.
Hello, everybody. Welcome back to another episode of the Art of War podcast. I'm your host, Nick Nanavati, and we are back for yet another wonderful year of this show. This is our 6th year in production. I'm so excited. Cannot do this show without all of the amazing support that you've all given to us throughout the years. And I just want to give back, and part of that is getting new guests, exciting guests, old guests, and returning guests on to share their ever-evolving ideas about Warhammer, how they find their place in the game as time goes on, and of course, see the successes that they get as they advance their Warhammer careers. Today, to kick off this season, we have Sam Pope. Sam is a returning guest who came on the show about a year ago, coming off of an amazing performance at the LVO with the Endless Swarm Tyranids. Now that detachment has taken quite a few kicks, but he's back at it with a goal to win a GT with every single detachment in the Codex. He's just coming off of a first place finish at the Everwinter tournament with none other than Assimilation Swarm. That's a type of Tyranid you've never even heard of. So we're going to go through and we're going to talk about Sam's wins. We're going to talk about his 5-0 finish at this amazing tournament. In part one of this 2-part show, we're going to get to know Sam, kind of reintroduce him, talk about his Tyranid journey, and talk about his list. How does this Assimilation Swarm work? Then in part 2, that's for our patrons. You can subscribe at patreon.com/AW40K. That's where we're going to get into the nitty-gritty. We're going to go through game by game by game by game, how Sam actually went undefeated at this tournament. So without further ado, Sam, how you doing?
I'm doing all right, Nick. I'm excited to be back on the podcast and honored to be, the new year, to help round out the new year, to talk about my quest with Tyranids, which is, Tyranids are always going to be near and dear to my heart, even if I play another faction. They've been just so much fun to play that I've had very little desire to play anything else. So maybe someday I'll talk about a different faction on here, but not for the foreseeable future. I'm sure.
If it ain't broke, don't fix it. You're kicking butt with the Tyranids here. But part of why I got you on for this first episode, Sam, is not only did you just come off of an awesome win with Assimilation Swarm right in the new year, but you also have kind of exemplified one of the mantras we try to teach here at Art of War, which is basically just like you've grown as a player so fast over time. I remember last time I had you on the show, I couldn't believe how little time you were playing Warhammer, and now as a player you've joined Team America. Tell me what that's about.
I look back on this past year as kind of a whirlwind, because if this is a fun fact, this tournament last year, Everwinter, was the first GT plus sized event, so event 32 or more, 5 rounds, that I went undefeated at. Before this time last year, I had never gone undefeated at a large-ish tournament, and so for that to happen, and then immediately after that go straight into LVO where I get third with Unending Swarm, and then just kind of hit the ground running after that, going to events and kind of continuously placing above my expectation, was just a thrilling time, and honestly a nerve-wracking time, because I kept waiting for the other shoe to drop a little bit. Because there's so much that you're kind of not familiar with when you're entering into the competitive world. You can know your army well, but there's, any one person can only play so much Warhammer, and you're not going to have enough information on everything at the table to know everything going into each match. And so I just kind of expected to be caught with my pants down at some point. And it certainly happened, but for the most part, I've just had a wonderful time. And, I went to, the kind of peak of the season, I guess, was with the Dallas Open, the GW Dallas Open, where I won with my Unending Swarm. And then immediately after, Games Workshop said, no more of that. No more Unending Swarm for you.
Welcome to the club.
I know. I felt honored, but also bummed out, because right after that, every other Tyranid detachment got big buff, and Unending Swarm was like, no, don't play that detachment anymore. So it was a kind of an interesting time, because it was a time for me to say, all right, well, I have shown that I can play Unending Swarm. I can play this Swarm style pretty well at a high level. So I feel like the next step, logically, is to try and improve my play at less models on the table. See if I can stop being the Swarm Nids abuser, the stat check Swarm Nids player, which we know isn't really how the army played, but kind of came across that way, and switch into playing some tough monsters. So I spent the next like 3 months or so playing Synaptic Nexus with Norns, and was just playing the big bugs only to try and practice that style of play.
How'd you find that abrupt switch, right? Like from 200 dudes that come back to life to like big monster smash.
To be honest, I felt like it was an easier switch than I thought it would be, because the way that Tyranids plays the game, or at least the way that I've seen them play the game by and large, is they are not an incredibly fast army. And lots of slower armies in this edition have to play a bait game where they dangle a piece of bait in the middle of the game board and say, you have to engage with this. Come and get it. And at some point the opponent commits, and then you get to hit them because they have walked into your threat range, because you've forced them to do so with your play. And so when I'm thinking about Unending Swarm, it was a little bit different than that, in that I was getting aggressive with my bugs, but at the end of the day, it still forced them to walk as fast as they could up the game board, or they were going to get move blocked. And when they're doing that, they can't really pick and choose their sight lines. They've got to book it towards the objectives, which allows me to put damage down in places that, and with pieces that generally couldn't do so. Termagant hordes with, sustained crits on 5s usually don't get to connect with a 6-inch move and this big blob of guys. But when people are running right at you, suddenly you get to hit way harder than you would expect. So that playstyle translated pretty neatly into Norns, because the way that Nexus Norns plays is the Norns run out onto the middle objective and say, I am, at the time they were 275 points, I want to say. And, that's an expensive piece, but with Armor Contempt, a 5-up Feel No Pain, 2-up Save, 4-up Invul, T11, like they really start to become an inefficient piece to trade into. And you can't just, because they're 15 OC, you can't just throw out little pieces. You have to actually commit like full, your full kill pieces straight into the middle right away. Which lets me then hit back with Exocrines and Tyrannifexes and all of that stuff.
Interesting. So you kind of, instead of using the inherent move block threat of the 200 body gaunt wall, like trapping you in your deployment zone as like pressure to get you to come out there, use the Norn as bait basically to get them to commit real pieces. You just counter strike with your Nids. And this is like a Nids play style, kind of transcendent of whatever detachment you find yourself playing, or is this like a Sam play style?
Maybe a little bit of both. I think that for the most part, it is how Nids like to play the game. They, you can play Invasion Fleet with, Monster Mash, and the piece that you're doing it with there is usually Maliceptors. You're putting Maliceptors in the middle and saying you're not going to trade efficiently into a Maliceptor with a 5-up Feel No Pain. Very few things can. And then you commit hard into them after that. In Assimilation, you can do it with Tyrant Guard bricks that are regenerating. You can do it in Crusher Stampede with Tyrannifexes with Acid Spray that just walk in the middle and say, yeah, you can walk in, but I'll overwatch you. I think the exception is you can play Vanguard Onslaught Tyranids more aggressively than you can other Tyranids. And a large part of that is just its speed. Vanguard Onslaught is a pretty fast army, all things considered, and can actually start to commit on its own terms. It doesn't quite have the damage to match some of the other top-tier fast armies, but it has some cool tricks that it can do to make up for it. But the cool thing about it is if you don't go first, or if you do decide you need to play more passive style with Vanguard Onslaught, you can generally fall back into that passive play where you put lictors on a point, on one far edge of a point, and you give them 6-inch lone op. And now they have to walk onto an objective to be able to shoot a lictor on the other side of the objective. And they become the bait piece. So and then to answer your question of whether it's a me play style or a Tyranids play style, I think that I play Tyranids so much because I enjoy that sort of thing.
So it's kind of symbiotic with that. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. There is a joy to forcing your opponent to make hard decisions. Because if you're playing a different army, if you're playing a fast killy army and you match into a fast killy army, a lot of it comes down to coin flips and oh, I hope my damage piece kills your damage piece, and one low roll of your damage can swing a whole game against you, and I really don't like that feeling. And I'd much rather my opponent commit into me and make tough decisions of, man, I really don't want to commit to the middle. I really don't want to commit my army to 120-point Termagants or this Norn that I have to spend my 350-point kill blob to kill this Norn, and then I know I'm going to die right after because the Norn's not really doing much damage. It's a tough feeling for them, and it's also, I think they get a little bit weirded out because it's hard, especially on top tables. You'll find a lot of opponents are very used to being really careful with their angles and being, extremely, hesitant
Precise,
to commit. Yeah, and very precise. And so to have their opponent rock up to the table and say, all right, I'm putting a Norn on the middle, or all right, here's all my Termagants. I'm out in the open. If you want to shoot me turn one, you can. They get really, hesitant. And it's, pretty scary to say, oh, I guess if you're coming out in the open, maybe I go first turn, I should put everything out in the open, because everything that's out in the open for me is not my damage pieces. So that means that you have to come out in the open and let me hit you first. And most people are really hesitant to do that, even if I'm giving them a juicy target to attack.
It's a great way to get the trade war started, basically.
And I like to get that started pretty quickly, or at least give my opponent the chance to get it started quickly.
Right.
Because I wouldn't say Tyranids win trade wars super efficiently, but what they do is once you have to come forward, all of your pieces get bogged down really quickly. And any detachment Tyranids play, your pieces are going to get really frustrated as soon as they come into the mid board, because Maleceptors make you -1 to hit, -1 to wound, 4 pivot. You're like stuck. If you're stuck in combat with a Maleceptor, you're never getting out. You just have to fall back. If you are a Termagant squad charges across and tags a Grand Nemesis Dread Knight, and now this 5 hammer swings into 20 Termagants. That feels terrible. If a bunch of Gene Stealers tag you, they don't kill you, but now you're battle shocked and can't fall back unless you want to die. There's so many things that make it really frustrating to commit into the midboard against Tyranids, where it's not killing, but it is denying points and holding up your pieces and giving you less to play with. And it lets me stretch my brain a little bit, where I get to, watch my opponent in confusion, watch as they slowly table my army and aren't scoring any points.
Yeah, right. No, that's definitely a really fun way to play. And I love that you've just consistently played Tyranids the whole process. I know you have a goal going on right now to kind of win a tournament with every single detachment the Tyranids have. How's that been going for you so far?
Well, I'm glad I got Unending Swarm done first, because it's hard to do now. But I think I'm going to give a little bit of credit to the Games Workshop rules writers in that they have done a fair enough job at buffing some weaker detachments, so that over the course of the edition, if you had asked me when the Codex came out, hey, how does it feel if you were to try and win with each of these detachments? I would have said terrible. It does not seem exciting at all. It's now a lot more doable. You have a lot of detachments that are a lot stronger than they were previously, and a lot of detachments that have very interesting play styles that you could explore. So to this point, I have won with every Codex detachment except for Crusher Stampede, which is not because I think it's not good or the worst of the 6, but it's because I have not found a way to innovate it. And I'm a little bit self-centered in that I want to play interesting lists that I feel like I can innovate with. And when I heard that Team USA this past WTC was bringing Crusher Stampede to Worlds, before even looking at the list, I sat down and was like, what would a good Crusher Stampede list look like to me? And I made a list and then went and looked up the WTC USA list, and it was the exact same list point for point. Like it was.
Oh my God!
I was shocked. I was like, that is insane. Like it's just that list. Like that's exactly what I would want to do if I were playing Crusher Stampede.
That is actually crazy.
And I just was and so with that in mind, I was like, well, they already did it, so I don't know if I want to try it now. I could try something with Norns at this point, but I feel like Norns are best in Assimilation or Nexus, so I just need to think about what seems like fun for me to play right now in Crusher Stampede. And then Warrior Bioform Onslaught is... I'm going to pretend like it doesn't exist for a little bit.
Oh, you don't like the Warriors?
That detachment is... It just doesn't do anything better than any of the other detachments, and that's a sad place for a new detachment to be. And there was a few of those that came out in the Grotmess, and it's okay because the vast majority, I would say, did bring a new play style to an army that did not have it yet. But as far as Tyranids go, when we're talking about how Tyranids like to play with the bait pieces that want people to come and commit forward, Warriors are not that. Shooting armies very easily can look at a squad of 6 warriors and say, I'm just going to kill you. I don't even need to come close to the objectives. I don't need to commit forward. I can trade upwards into 6 warriors, even with a 5-up invul. It just makes it, and then the damage output is not impressive, and I just end up being a little bit confused about where I'd want to take it. Ignores cover strat on ranged warriors is cool. It's relevant. Tyranids lack for AP, so having ignores cover, readily accessible is nice. But I'm hoping that I can, maybe a unit will get a buff that I don't expect, and then I can play them. But that's going to be a later in the edition challenge. Definitely Crusher Stampede at the next, tournament. I can bring a personalized list for. It's going to be something that I try.
I gotcha. So that brings me to my next kind of line of questioning, which is like how you've been adapting to being on Team America, because it seems like you've been so focused on like Tyranids and your goal to be like the best Tyranid master of all time, which is awesome. I think that's a really cool goal. But then now you're part of Team America. What's that transition been like, being part of like this larger than you team, where there's just so much knowledge and different matchups and matrixing and team mentality going on? How's that transition been? What's your experience been like?
I mean, it's been a super interesting experience. I've really enjoyed being able to discuss with the people on Team USA their thoughts on different things. And it's honestly, at first, it was a little bit intimidating because compared to a lot of the people on the team, I'm newer to the scene, and am also a faction specialist, which is rare on Team USA. I think a lot of it comes down to when you are locking in your final 8 members for the team, it's done before the last balance change happens. And so being able to represent a wide variety of factions is a big bonus for the team. And so I came into the kind of expecting to just, I guess, unsure of how helpful I could be, but hopeful that I could be. And I've been my fears have been assuaded, and I've felt that I've been able to really express my thoughts and interests, and also accept a lot of other people's. And I think a part of that, I can even talk about it a little bit more later, but the Assimilation Swarm list that I brought here is partially inspired by some of the things people were talking about in the in Team USA about assimilation, and being able to take ideas and thoughts from all over is a really valuable thing to have, and especially from all these strong players with different play styles. There's a lot to learn from, and so that was kind of my thoughts. And then the other thing is I needed to stretch my muscles a little bit, because for I've done teams events with Tyranids, and I had done them prior to joining Team USA, and been successful. But most of the time, the 2 big events that I was on competitive teams for, I was playing a kind of blunter style role where I am trying to deny points to armies. I'm basically a wild card that can be played at any time to score 10 points and make sure that what would potentially be an unfortunate thing where we have to get stuck with a tricky pairing, instead is just all right, here's 10 points, we'll just cancel out that one, which is useful, and it's a very useful thing. But it is one play style, and it's something I've been doing in singles and in teams for a while. So stepping into Team USA, what I wanted to stretch my limits to was working on scoring those big wins. Can I be someone who is pushing large, wins in a way that is operating on a different level than the rest of the Tyranid lists that I play are. And so I pivoted to learning Vanguard Onslaught and playing a hyper aggressive style of play that I had not been playing previously. And it is stressful. It's a lot of fun. It's so much fun. But oh my gosh, is it stressful to say, okay, I'm just going to send my whole army into you, and then you get a turn to shoot a couple things at it. And I really hope that it's not going to just kill everything. And, I'm pretty good at doing math on the fly, so it's usually fine. It works out. And it's given me a lot of confidence to play that style, which I think is a really
it's definitely a fly by the seat of your pants play style, though, right? Like infiltrating and charging turn one.
Yeah, 100%. Using Shadow of the Warp turn one on your opponent who says like,
"Oh my god,
what's that about?" And then it's like, "Oh yeah, actually you can't fall back and you can't do anything. All my infantry's in melee with you, and also you can't move onto the objectives." And it's like, "Oh, actually that's a really relevant thing that you've done to me." But it's stressful.
Have you found trying to explore this new play style where you're pushing really aggressively and trying to go for big wins and get out of your comfort zone? Has that made you a better Warhammer player?
I think it 100% has. I think it's given me a lot of confidence in my ability as just a Warhammer player in general, to be honest, because while I've been for a while semi-confident in my ability to deny scoring, it's given me insight into what it looks like to score big wins. And I think those are fundamentally different, because to score a big win, you have to have confidence in your stats and confidence in your opponent's killing power and just kind of a solid knowledge base on everything that you were going into. Because otherwise, if you are not confident in those things, then you shouldn't commit, I guess would be my thought. If you
right, then how would you know if you're making a good decision?
Exactly. Yeah. And so you should play a slower game where you're denying points and killing things as you need to score points. But if you want to score the big win, then early on, turns 1 and 2, you need to be pushing hard and aggressively, picking up important pieces that your opponent has, and then knowing with confidence that whatever they kill on crackback is not going to score them enough for you to, not deny all their scoring and be on their home objective by turn 4. Like, these things are, it requires a lot of confidence in your knowledge of the game, and it requires a completely different mindset to an approach of the game, where you are moving from, when you first start out in the game, you are thinking, I'm going to kill all of my opponent's models. And then you start to learn that that's not how you win games, that you win games by denying and focusing on scoring and thinking about how you're going to score your secondaries and thinking about that. And then how you really win games is you combine that knowledge with killing them. Like, you go back full circle to, I need to set up to score all my secondaries. I need to know every secondary card in my deck and have every lictor in place or every lone op in place to score them. And I need to be constantly aware of my opponent's sight lines and how far they can move and what they can see when they move. And I need to be able to send my whole army at them right away and then kill them. Like, you need to do all of these things combined to score these big wins against strong opponents. Or your opponents will, especially against really strong opponents, which you don't get to play that often, they will sneak out points that you aren't expecting if you play too, passively. And that has been, a big awakening for me, I think, as a 40K player, is both a desire and a knowledge of how to push big wins against my opponents. And it's been a lot of fun. And then I've had to learn to put that joy of learning that big play style on the back seat for when people say, all right, go back to your blunter play style, you're good at that. And I can say, all right, right. Fair enough. I can do that too. And that's probably why I was, I'm an attractive asset to the team, is that's what I'm known for. But I want to show that I can do both. And I also want to show that I can do other factions if I need to. And so it's been interesting to try out and play these other factions that I maybe don't have a physical collection for, but gaining some experience for when you're on Team USA, you can, source a collection if you need to. So it's better to show that you can play these armies and can be an asset to the team, even if, in June, every Tyranid model goes up 100 points. I can still, play the game. And there's just so much room to grow. It's so impossible to know enough about Warhammer that I'm ever really feel like I've gotten there. I've learned it all. It just there's too much to do.
No, I totally get that. That's just not how this works. I mean, it's a ever evolving game as well, right? So like you're never gonna have all the knowledge. And one of the things that's beautiful about it is that you can find so many different ways to not only play the game and seek wins in different ways, because team scoring, you're obviously pushing for bigger wins. It's a different goal, different mentality. It's a whole skill set to learn. But it's also just different ways to enjoy the game, which I really like.
If you are listening to this, it probably means you play Warhammer 40k. And if you're playing Warhammer, you know you need a lot of dice. Baron of Dice is where we get our dice from. They produce amazing different kinds of dice. We just recently got all kinds of different faction dice shipped to us, which we use on our stream games. But not only do they look really cool, but they're highly customizable. You can get different symbols, corners that are square, corners that are round, different shapes and sizes, different sided dice. It's all the rage. And they're customizable in color and design as well. They are so cool looking. Not only that, but they feel great to roll in your hands. I've never held dice that roll and feel this good. Not only that, but they are scientifically perfectly balanced. There are tons of case studies on people rolling thousands of dice and recording all the results that they get. And sometimes you might get a die that rolls just a few too many ones. We've all had to throw it out before. These dice are not like that. They are perfectly balanced to a T, thousands of rolls, perfect distribution. If you want to take your Warhammer game seriously and make sure the dice are not screwing you over, get some Baron of dice.
So kind of tying this back into your Tyranids a little bit, you just took this Assimilation Swarm list to Everwinter, got first place with it. What was the exact list you took to the tournament?
Sure. So the Assimilation list started out with a Tervigon, with the Biophagic flow enhancement, and then 80 Termagants, which is the swarm base that I like to start with.
I was gonna say you can change the detachment. You can't change the player.
It's a nice base for certain detachments. It works pretty well. Along with it is the winged Hive Tyrant to assist in those free strats and -1 attack and melee. I have a squad of 10 Hormagaunts as well. A Biovore, 3 Exocrines, a Norn Assimilator, 2 Psychophages, a Pyrovore, a Ripper Swarm by itself, and 3 Venomthropes. And that's the full list.
I always love looking at your list because I'm like, there's nothing in here. It's just like gaunts on gaunts on gaunts on gaunts. It's a million models. Don't get me wrong, but it's like, where? How does this do things? I'm also not that familiar with Assimilation Swarm. Here, I saw you and John Lennon talking about it in the Discord, and I know of it, but like, let's share with the class. What is this army trying to do?
Okay, so Assimilation Swarm is what if Tyranids ate Necrons, and other than the metallic taste that they got in their mouth, they also got the knowledge of how to respawn and regenerate every single model in their army. They are taking that knowledge and only put it into specific harvester bugs that basically in the command phase get to pick a friendly unit within 6 inches and respawn D3+1 wounds to it, or a whole model if it's an infantry unit, or 3 whole models if it's an unending swarm or an endless swarm unit. So that's just kind of the base. Is we have certain units that are respawning. The kind of what gets added on to it is a couple good enhancements. The first is that you can get fights first, which I have on my flying Hive Tyrant, but you can put on a Gene Stealer brick or a Tyrant Guard brick with a Hive Tyrant inside. Then there's an enhancement that increases the aura of respawn from 6 inches to 9 inches if they're near the person with the enhancement. And then you combine it with some nasty strats to get further respawns. The funniest of them is a respawn when a Tyranid unit, like one of your own units, dies near a harvester. The harvester can repurpose that biomass and regenerate another unit nearby, which is funny enough by itself, but is extra funny when you combine it with a spore mine that you spawn out of a biovore and that dies when it walks into someone or when someone walks into it. So you can set up a spore mine, and if you're playing against, there's a couple of different funny things you can do. One of which is just throw a spore mine behind cover next to your, Norn or next to your swarm, and just walk it out of cover and blow it up into something to respawn in your movement phase. You can also spawn a spore mine 9 inches away from something and just go for a 9-inch charge. If you hit it, you can respawn the thing that is nearby the thing that you charged.
So you just have like a lot of mechanisms to respawn your gaunts or whatever. What's like a normal turn for you? Like how many people are coming back, basically?
So it's not about how many people are coming back, because it's not about how many models. Most of my regeneration in this list is being poured into my Norn Assimilator, who is kind of an interesting centerpiece in a list like this, because the way that it's set up, I am essentially telling my opponent, hey, here's all these gaunts, and if you're good at killing them, then go kill this Norn Assimilator, because it's also here and standing on an objective with 15 OC. And I have a 2 CP strat in Assimilation to give that Norn, if it's on an objective it controls, a 4-up Feel No Pain. So this big old Norn with T11 2-up save is going to get a 4-up Feel No Pain as well, and then regenerate D3 plus 1 wounds up to 4 times in a turn. And just basically, if you don't kill it, it's coming right back up to lots of wounds that you've got to chew through, all the while I'm slowly chunking down the biggest threats to the things on objectives. So the biggest playstyle is respawning wounds there. And then at the meantime, while you're chipping away at my Termagants, my Tervigon and the general respawns are happening. So I would say in general, on a turn 3 or 4, I'm respawning, 11 Termagants and maybe 8 wounds on an Assimilator, which is, not insane, but is enough of a attrition bonus that I'm getting that it just kind of slowly wins the objective war and wins the game through that.
Interesting. So you're really about that, just kind of regenerating for like small value over time life. Because there's small little tactics you can pull. Like I'm gonna have a damage unit be like right off an objective behind a wall and try to respawn onto it. That's definitely an annoying thing your opponent can have to play around. And if they don't, then awesome free primary. But that's not the easiest thing to set up. And that alone is not going to work against top players. So it's really just the accrual of value over time, essentially.
Yeah, there's the general philosophy of Tyranids, which is make your opponent commit into things that they don't want to commit into, is at play here more than ever, where I'm saying, here's a bunch of Termagants, and here's a Norn Assimilator, and my Exocrines are going to hide in the back, and everything else is going to hide in the back, and you push me off these objectives. And, because I have taken my invasion fleet list base, which has, instead of a Norn Assimilator, some Rupture Tyrannifexes hiding in the back, and I've turned them into a Norn, which comes to the front, I now have, even more objective pressure at the cost of a little bit of firepower. And I am able to score points even when my opponent kills too much of one of the pieces. If my opponent takes down the Norn, my Termagants are still scoring. If my opponent kills 2 or 3 squads of Termagants, heaven forbid, in a turn, I still have the Norn who's chugging away on an objective.
And you have like 2 extremes on the profile side. You're not really in the middle at all. So it's like if someone doesn't have adequate anti-tank, you have multiple Exocrines and a Norn. Like, here you go. And someone doesn't have the ability to just kill 80 Gaunts. Here's 80 Gaunts.
Yeah, and it's especially good because if someone does have an army that has both in spades, where they've built a truly, solid army that has a lot of anti-tank shooting and a lot of anti-infantry, what I can do is say, well, what are my Exocrines in a position to go kill? On their go turn where they pick up, Termagants and they put the Norn down to 3 wounds or whatever they do, what can my Exocrines smack back into and do a lot of damage into? If it's the anti-tank, great, because then my Norn will be untouchable for the rest of the game. And if it's the anti-infantry, great, then my Termagants will run amok for the rest of the game. It basically means that as long as I'm shooting them into the same target, or as long as I am getting value out of them, I will, be able to run away with one of the profiles in the same way that maybe a Chaos Knights player, an Imperial Knights player is focusing down the enemy's anti-tank as quick as they can. I get to pivot on the spot and decide which my opponent has that's more in the open and is more vulnerable for me to punish. And then pivot my play style towards it. Maybe my Termagants start taking a back seat to my Monstrous who step forward into the front once I've cleared out some of their anti-tank, or vice versa.
How do you decide basically your deployment here. When you see like 80 Termagants, it's easy to just kind of imagine a carpet of Gaunts covering the board. But like, is it 4 bricks next to each other? Are they conga lined and interwoven? Are they in different locations on the table? Is one in reserve? What are we thinking here?
I always feel bad for the spectators out there, my loyal fans, just kidding, who are watching me on stream and have to spend the first 10 minutes watching me put model after model onto the deployment zone, because it certainly is the most boring and time consuming part of my game, because it's completely interwoven termagants. I put all my big monsters down first, and then I deploy my termagants last, and they are intermixed. They're all strung back to all of my different buffs. In this detachment, I have 2 psychophages that give off a 6-up feel no pain aura. I have the Tervigon that respawns. I have Venom Throats that give -1 to hit. I have the Hive Tyrant that has a 12-inch free strat aura. I want those Termagants to be in range of all 4 of those things at all times. And so I am putting my Termagants so that they can threaten all 3 objectives while also all being in range of those abilities. And I also want them to be, because I have 80 Termagants, they are going to be in the open, but I want all of the squads to be in the open in a way where if someone comes out to shoot them, they'll only get 1 or 2 activations out before I pull out a line of sight. Because if I can string a squad far enough, my opponent won't be able to threaten sight lines on every part of the squad.
Is coherency not a problem with this like massive stringing?
Well, that's the thing. The cool thing about coherency is the worst case scenario is you die down to 6 models and then you respawn them all back. Because dying down to 6 models with a 20-man unit, and then you respawn 3, and then you respawn D3 plus 3, and then you respawn 3, and then it's like, okay, now I have a 17 model unit. Sure. It's not the end of the world if that happens, but a lot of the time it doesn't need to, because if they're trying to kill me in melee, then I can pile in and consolidate to correct coherency. Or if they're shooting, I'll generally not stretch to max coherency across the whole thing. I'll generally have a couple of breakpoints along the way where I've got some space where I can kill Gaunts down to a certain point, and then have another little dinner bone in the middle ready to survive onwards and stop me from having to kill down to coherency.
Very nice.
Works just fine usually.
I imagine this assimilation style list is more of that blunder in teams, that singles army that just edges out wins than say Vanguard is.
Oh, 100%. I mean, almost too much, I would say, because my invasion fleet list has more damage. I like comparing the two over comparing Vanguard, because Vanguard is just so different in that it's just pushing and pushing and pushing and trying to do damage and stealing points and scoring and holding people in place, and it plays very differently. But my invasion fleet plays very similarly, where I've got 80 Termagants that are. This is the list that I took to Worlds, and it had 80 Termagants. It's basically the same stuff switching out some psychophages for some lictors and the assimilator for some rupture fexes, but invasion, we have sustained hits or lethals, and with the rupture fexes, your damage output is a lot greater. So you are able to capitalize on mistakes, and you can start to push, if someone gets too aggressive with a unit or put something out in the open to try and kill you early, you can actually punish them for it, and end up sweeping away games that way, where assimilation can't really do that as well. The damage output isn't there as much. It's more just saying, hey, even if you do commit all round 1, I have enough damage to kill some important pieces, but you'll win the attrition war. By the end of the game, you'll be in it. It won't be like you've lost so terribly that the game is over. It'll just be that I've scored more points than you, and that's all there is to it. And so it's leaned further that direction, and I almost to a fault, after playing the list. I think that it's super interesting, and I like the things that it's doing, but it definitely gives up a lot of ability to force any higher scores at all. I just kind of know the points that I'm going to get are kind of set in stone from early on, regardless of the plays that my opponent does, to a certain extent. So I like it, and I think I like it more than any other way of playing assimilation, because there's some interesting things you can do in assimilation where you can run a bunch of Tyrant Guard that are, really tough and cheap and are respawning. And you could run multiple Norn Assimilators, or you could run Tyranid Warrior Bricks, or double Hive Tyrant. Like you can run a Hive Tyrant and a Swarm Lord together. There's cool things you can do, but a lot of them are depending on OC1 Tyrant Guard. And that makes me pretty uncomfortable, because OC1 is one of those things where you don't even have to kill the whole unit. You can kill 3 Tyrant Guard and suddenly 2 Catachans swap a point. It really doesn't defend a point as well as you would hope it to. Even if you're screening out the whole objective, they just have to shoot a couple guys off, and then you can charge them, and they're so bad in melee that anything will survive. And it just ends up being it's been disappointing.
Yeah, I was surprised not to see Tyrant Guard in your list, but the OC issue definitely makes sense. I mean, OC1 is not OC 160,
Yeah, exactly. It doesn't do what I feel Tyranids likes to do. Like, it doesn't bait people forward. They can send out chaff pieces to handle the Tyrant Guard and swap points. They can, trade with you until you're out of objective play, and then until you bring out your damage pieces, and then they can kill them and win from there. And it just makes me a bit more uncomfortable. This list style says, listen, I'm not doing damage either way, so I might as well lean as far as I can into objective pressure with actual OC that you have to commit into.
As one person who loves not doing damage and winning anyway to another. So I always ask everybody what their favorite piece of advice is for an up-and-coming Warhammer player, and I need to know what your favorite piece of advice is.
The piece of advice that I give is always to practice kind of a mantra. The mantra, I think, goes in order like this. Every turn, at the beginning of the turn, when you're doing your movement phase, you think, how can I score my secondaries? How can I deny my opponent primary? How can I score primary next turn? And how can I deny my opponent secondaries? These 4 steps are in an increasing order of difficulty. So the easiest one is scoring your own secondaries. You know what you need to do and how to set up to do those things. They tell you at the top of the turn. Second easiest is denying your opponent primary. The third is setting up for your primary on the following turn by tagging stuff and keeping stuff on points that otherwise might not be there. And then denying your opponent's secondaries is probably the hardest. Knowing when to hide your units or screen out parts of the board. I mean, screening out is easier, but once you get into some of those more interesting secondaries, it can get harder. So if you have those 4 things in your mind and you ask yourself them at the top of every turn, and you practice getting better at each one in turn, I think you'll naturally improve at the game over time.
Awesome. I'm super excited to hear how this list actually plays in part 2 of the show. We're going to go through your games you played and kind of go through the play-by-plays, the actual positioning of the units, these gaunts, when to bait somebody, all that good stuff. And we can see exactly how Sam went 5-0. It's clear, Sam, that you are an absolute guru when it comes to these Tyranids. So if you're interested in Tyranids or learning how to play against them, you won't want to miss this episode. You can subscribe and catch this part 2 on patreon.com/AOW40K. It's $5 a month. It gets you access to this part 2, along with 270 plus other episodes. That's right. We're doing this for 6 years, folks. And not only that, but you get our Discord server, which is an amazing asset with tons of amazing top players, all trying to help you learn the game and become your best. So you want to learn this stuff? Go check out that Patreon. Sam, thank you so much for coming on.
Thank you.
You're very welcome. All right, listeners, catch us over in part 2 for our patrons. We'll see you next week.
Like what you just listened to? Check out Art of War Down Under and Art of War Unbroken on the competitive 40K network. TheArtOfWar40K.com.